Hey guys, welcome back. Does Singapore even have an opposition anymore? This is an important video I thought I should make. I'm going to be looking down at my notes for a little bit here and there, so excuse me looking down, but let's dive right into it. This video is not about attacking anyone. It's not about taking sides. It's actually about asking a question that I think many Singaporeans are asking inside but fail to say out loud. And since I have a YouTube channel, I thought I'd say it out loud. Does Singapore even have an opposition anymore? I'm not here to give you a final answer, but I'm here to ask the question because I've been asking the question, and I think a lot of my friends have been asking the question, and I think a lot of you might be asking the question. Some of you who are more well-read about politics than we may be may actually even have some very interesting answers. So I'd love to see those answers in the comments, whichever social platform you're watching this on. Now, the first thing is that it's very important to clarify what people mean when they say opposition. Through my videos over the last few days since the Pritam Singh incident happened where he was removed as leader of the opposition, one of my friends has been commenting on Facebook saying that, what do we even mean by the word opposition? And she really made me start to think, and being a spiritual person and a spiritual life coach and a healer and so on and so forth myself, after my 10 or 15 years in media before that, and I transitioned and now I do both, I got thinking, terminology is very important, words are important, meaning is important. And of course, the most important thing is that this topic affects all our lives on a daily basis. Now, some people, when they say opposition, they mean a counterbalance to power. Some people mean an alternative government, and the word alternative there being used on purpose in line with spiritual terms and the fact that words have meanings and so on. The third thing that people could mean is they mean moral or ideological check. And of course, in a very drastic case, somebody could mean literally a revolution, as we've seen throughout history in different countries where ruling parties removed from power. Now, of course, in the context of Singapore, that is unlikely to happen via violent means, and we have a very civilized process here. And hopefully, one day, for those people who do want to see other people in power, that civilized process might contribute to another party being in power. But of course, that civilized process on the flip side might be so civilized and so well controlled and so properly maintained, and combined with the wonderful work that the Singapore current government is doing in terms of economics and everything else, might never really see a change of political power to another party in that sense. So it remains to be seen. But before we judge whether Singapore has an actual opposition or whether it has an opposition anymore, we need to be very clear which definition we're using. You might use your own definition, and that's fine, or one of those I've listed, and judge and think accordingly. And that's wonderful. Just be clear of what you're thinking, and then the line of reasoning gets very, very clear after that. A question that's always come up for me personally is that what is the difference between parliament and execution? So what is parliament actually for? I didn't know and I wanted to find out, so I found out. And so the thing is that when you watch Singapore Parliament on YouTube, it can seem like an endless debate, right? And so to a layperson like me, it felt like, and I've actually left comments there, do we really have this much time and money, as a nation, just to argue? And it felt like that for a bit. But here's the key distinction that changed how I see it. Now, an explicit clarification that ChatGPT provided me, and also I was doing some research on Google, and what I found was that Singapore places the heavy lifting of governance in the executive and the civil service, while Parliament functions primarily as a forum for scrutiny, debate, and public record, not day-to-day execution. That's why it seems like they're just arguing. In my mind, it was just arguing. In other words, Parliament is meant to debate. Execution happens elsewhere, inside ministries, statutory boards, and government agencies. That means that policies are often already drafted, piloted, or implemented before Parliament debates them. So the debates you see are not the government doing nothing. The debates that you see are a checking mechanism. And once you understand that, a deeper question naturally follows. And this question was posed to me actually by ChatGPT. It wasn't even my own question, which is, if execution happens elsewhere, what does opposition really mean in Singapore? And that was actually on the thumbnail of my second video on this topic. Thumbnail says, Workers' Party said no, what does it really mean? That was put there because I, as a layperson who's in another field, not politics, doesn't really know what all this means, and I really wanted to find out and share it with you guys. So here's what the opposition actually does in Singapore. When the opposition wins a GRC or SMC, they become elected MPs, they run Meet the People sessions, they handle residents' cases, they raise issues in Parliament, they work with town councils, sometimes with friction. And I heard this when I registered as a polling agent with the SDP in 2025, that sometimes there's some friction there. So I believe ChatGPT might be getting its facts right. What they do not do, however, is run ministries, control national budgets, or set national policy. Their role is constituency-level work and parliamentary scrutiny, not executive control. Now, what happens on the ground in GRCs? In opposition-held GRCs, government services still operate normally, HDB transport utilities all continue, the state does not withdraw any services, thank God. That's a great thing that the PAP and just the government of Singapore does. I like that. The PAP does not act as MPs there, but the government still functions as a state. In GRCs that the opposition does not hold, in the sense they don't win in, they may walk the ground, they may engage residents, they may build presence, they may prepare for future elections, but they have no formal authority there. Here's a parliamentary dynamics example that I wanted to bring to mind, which really got me, got my juices flowing, and I was commenting on YouTube today. There was a parliamentary clip from the Straits Times circulating where Workers' Party MP Kenneth Tiong was asked to apologize to Minister Chee after calling a question stupid. Some people saw that as enforcing parliamentary decorum. Others saw it as power dynamics at play. I certainly saw it as both. Because I was like, yes, this makes sense that, don't say the word stupid in parliament for whatever reason, and we can debate those reasons till the cows come home. But let's just say that's a general principle of being polite. And on the other hand, the remark that Chee made in return, and I actually put this in my YouTube comment, there actually was a bit of sarcasm there. And I think that is why Kenneth Tiong was a bit like, okay. And he was like, that's a stupid question. Of course, technically, it was also a little bit silly in the sense, in my opinion, in the sense that there were certain phrases that he used, like a zero risk environment. Chee said, may I ask Mr. Tiong to clarify if the Workers' Party's position is that we should adopt a zero risk approach, or would he agree with me that we should adopt a risk-proportionate approach? To which Kenneth said, there's a pattern of ministers and political office holders asking very rhetorical questions, which have no meaning. Then the speaker asked him to respond to the minister. So he said, Minister, so the answer is no. And I don't think it is the minister's point of view that you should, in fact, have a zero-risk approach, because it's impossible. So he's asking a stupid question, to which Chee replied, Sir, I think it is not quite appropriate for Mr. Tiong to use the word stupid when we are having a discussion in this house.
I asked him a question to clarify
what is his position, and I respectfully ask him to withdraw that comment and to apologize. Kenneth Tiong says, I do withdraw that comment. I will maintain that that question is not a meaningful question. Chee says, I am disappointed that Mr. Tiong chose to conduct this discussion in this manner. I only wanted to clarify the position so that I can give him a considered response. The speaker says, I would just like to inform Mr. Tiong that I am quite disappointed by the exchange just now. This is the Speaker of the House. I know that you've withdrawn your earlier comment. I consider what you had said just now to be quite insulting, and it is beneath the dignity of this House to use such language. I would have expected an apology, but I accept that you did not. You just withdrew that comment. Kenneth Tiong says, I would like to apologize to the minister for the comment. And the Speaker of the House says, kindly stand up when you speak. So he repeats after standing up, I would like to apologize to the minister for my comment on his question. Chee says, I thank Mr. Tiong for his apology. I accept it, and I hope that we can in future have such discussions in a civilized and polite manner, respectful manner, polite and civilized manner, respectful manner. What interested me personally is not who's right, but how differently Singaporeans interpreted that same moment, as you can see in the YouTube comments. That tells us something important about expectations, hierarchy, and how Parliament is experienced by the public. Something else I've noticed is that capable people often avoid politics. This one is strange, but not that strange, but hear me out. Many capable Singaporeans avoid politics entirely. Some out of fear, but most not out of fear, but because the incentives obviously don't make sense to them. High scrutiny, limited control unless you're inside the ruling structure, long-term reputational cost for some industries. That's not fear-mongering necessarily, that's opportunity cost. So for a person like me who's making YouTube videos and airing my views to the world, it kind of makes sense because I teach about different human behavior anyway, and politics is just one area I look at among other areas, and you can find these on my YouTube channel in an ever-expanding list of videos. However, I will say that the previous generation, our parents' generation, who grew us up and gave us a lot of their values, did say that there were certain things about politics in Singapore which they were just better off not getting involved in. And I don't think that that was just because of the opportunity cost or the fact that it doesn't benefit their industry and blah, blah, blah. It's also that there's a stigma attached to that around certain things that the government had done long, long ago or is rumored to have done. I don't have the proof on whether they've done it, but we've all heard that story about how some people got picked up and then put in a bungalow on Sentosa or somewhere. Maybe that's a rumor, it's a fictional tale. It's possible. I wouldn't know. What do you guys think? Or was it actually real and proven later? And do some of you know? I remember there was an article that came out about that around the time of the GE 2025, but that was just one of the stories. But we heard other things, like there was some opposition MP in the past who got sued a lot, and then he had to leave the country, or he chose to leave the country. That one I heard from a pretty reputable lawyer in Singapore. They said, like, be careful when you deal with the government or any any powerful opponent. And that's not just politics, but just outside even, because legally anybody can sue you for doing something that's untoward towards them. So we've all heard these stories. And I must say this just to balance it. I don't think that the older generation who was saying don't really get involved in politics necessarily was saying it because of the Singapore government only, but because of governments in general, even in other countries, and how dangerous that can actually be in other countries. Those are well-documented facts in other countries. In Singapore, it's still a bit like, did they do that? Did they not do that? I don't really have evidence. I can't really find it. It's a story. But in other countries, there are things that are really well-documented and proven, like assassinations, blackmail, extortion. I mean, that is something I can totally understand why my parents' generation didn't want us to do that when we grew up. I wouldn't want my daughter to do that or go near that either, just for her safety. Of course, if she decides to be a politician and she's like, that's my thing, like, well and good, do what your heart pleases. But if not, then it's unnecessary danger. So I totally get that. But that also brings up the question that if then the ruling party is running the country quite well, which I think they are, and then they're going to stay in power forever in that way, then do we even really have an opposition? Because anybody who's capable, who went to a good school, who's a little bit intelligent, a little bit wise, a little bit curious, a little bit energetic, whatever your skills are, right, across the realm of human skills and endeavor, would they even want to enter politics? And then, so if nobody wants to really enter politics, that means, I don't know how the PAP does its recruitment yet. I can go and research into that. Maybe some of you know. If it's like friends of friends, or if it's like people we know, or if it's like certain top schools or whatever, whatever the method is, like in corporate, it's all these methods, right? In startups, which I used to work in, it's all these methods. People you know, family members, friends. In fact, even on Shark Tank, when you watch Shark Tank, the first few funding rounds, Mark Cuban calls it the friends and family round. So, it's natural. Even in acting and overseas industries like Bollywood and so on, you, of course, even in a family business, if you're running a chicken rice stall, of course, you would try to bring your family into it, if you think they could run it well, like a family business. So that's one aspect. Like, who do you know? Do your kids also want to join politics? Whatever. It works the same way in sports. It works the same way in everything. I make music. My daughter's going to start making music. Personally, I know a lot of people see that as wrong. I don't personally see that as wrong at all, because it's just the logical thing to do. If I was a carpenter, I would teach my daughter or son carpentry. That's it. Of course, whether they want to do it or not, that's their choice. But I would teach them, right? That's just, at this point. So, but there are other things, like, could they be from good schools? Or could they be from certain schools? Or could they be from this area? Because, our political party is quite strong in this area. Whatever it is, does the opposition have a chance, or a valid chance, or somebody who wants to oppose the ruling party in elections? Is there a valid chance there? Like, what do you guys think, right? Let's talk about that. So I came across an article by the Singapore Civil Service College titled Singapore's Political Economy, Two Paradoxes. That one blew my mind. Singapore versus the median voter model. And I'll put the link in the description so you can check it out. So they go on to say that Singapore, when compared to almost any other democratic country, has two deeply puzzling features. Puzzle number one, it frequently adopts policies that economists would call economically efficient, but politically unpopular. For example, Singapore has near unilateral free trade, admits large numbers of immigrants, supplies most medical care on a fee-for-service basis, means tests most government assistance, imposes peak load pricing on roads, and fights recessions by cutting employers' taxes. These are policies that could easily have cost politicians their jobs in many other democracies, yet they have stood the test of time in Singapore. Puzzle number two. Even though Singapore follows the forms of British parliamentary democracy, it is effectively a one-party state. The People's Action Party, PAP, has held uninterrupted power since the country gained home rule in 1959, has never received less than 60% of the popular vote, and has always enjoyed an overwhelming majority in Singapore's parliament. It currently holds 82 out of 84 seats. This was in 2009, when the article was published, the number of seats, I mean. The interesting part, though, is this. To put these paradoxes in perspective, we need to review the median voter model, the workhorse of studies in modern political economy. In the median voter model, two political parties compete for votes by advocating a platform, a bundle of policies. Citizens in turn vote for the party with the platform closest to their ideal policy bundle. Setting aside various complications, the median voter model implies that competing political parties tend to offer policy platforms that centrist voters regard as ideal. This also implies that a rival party should be able to match a dominant party's electoral success simply by mimicking its centrist platform. As a result, parties rarely achieve lasting political dominance. Despite its abstractions, the median voter model usually fits the facts of actual political behavior in democracies around the world. However, it also highlights why Singapore's political economy is so puzzling. Singapore persistently adopts policies that would have been overturned by the democratic process almost anywhere else on earth, but the same party keeps winning election after election by a landslide. Why doesn't a rival party promise to abolish unpopular policies and soar to power? How, in short, is Singapore's political economic equilibrium possible? Explanation number one, and I was surprised I found this on the Singapore government website. Singapore is not really a democracy. One common conclusion in Singapore must be, despite its Westminsterian pedigree, a thinly veiled dictatorship which informally suppresses political rivals and rigs its elections, which in turn allows the government to unilaterally adopt unpopular yet efficient policies. This Singapore as a thinly veiled dictatorship theory coheres neatly with Western stereotypes about the city-state and elegantly resolves the two paradoxes. Unfortunately, this dictatorship thesis ignores three basic facts. And that's when I went, oh, that's why it's a government website, okay. And then they explain. First, Singapore has several legal opposition parties. They may face minor indignities, but hardly live in mortal fear of the PAP. I don't know how the article claims that. I think only a person's mind can dictate whether they live in mortal fear or not. But okay, let's assume they're accurate. Pressure from the dominant party is a feeble explanation for the opposition's near-total failure to gain political office, given that many countries, such as Pakistan, it says, demonstrate vigorous electoral competition despite far graver dangers. Nah, that's not necessarily true. I mean, just because somewhere else has graver dangers and people are still competing, doesn't mean the human beings in this part of the world would face those same graver dangers and still compete as well. The article is saying that people in Pakistan are not fearful, so we are not fearful. We should also, because they've said the line, demonstrate vigorous electoral competition despite far graver dangers. Not necessarily true, but okay, well-written article, but not necessarily true. Second, while there are unusual restrictions on political expression, these shield people from criticism, not policies. Okay, yeah, I take that point. That's a good one. Opposition candidates who avoid personal attacks against PAP politicians can and do freely attack specific policies as ineffective or unfair. Makes sense? An opposition candidate could safely campaign on a platform to abolish electronic road pricing. Nice one. Or slash immigration. Indeed, an opposition candidate could safely campaign on a platform to rein in politically motivated defamation suits. In the median voter model, embracing these positions would quickly usher opposition politicians into power, assuming, of course, that the median voter genuinely wants the changes in question. Right? Makes sense? So basically they're saying, argue fairly and let's talk about policies, not hurling insults at each other. That makes sense. Third, there is no evidence that Singapore's elections are corrupt. That's true as well, I think, from what I know. Indeed, international observers have consistently rated its government as one of the least corrupt in the world, with elections that are free from irregularities and vote rigging. The Global Barometer Country Report for Singapore finds that 86% of Singaporeans believe that their elections are either completely free and fair or free and fair but with minor problems. Wait, that's strange. Only 86%? I would assume that 100% think that, because there really is no evidence of foul play so far in Singapore. So while decades of one-party electoral dominance is frequently a strong symptom of electoral corruption, this is not the case in Singapore. Now you start to wonder, did a pro-PAP supporter write this? Of course, you'd always wonder that if you're trying to observe biases and you're an astute observer of things and so on. Anyway, this is a great article. Explanation number 2, I'm not going to go into this fully, but the heading says Singapore's voters are unusually economically literate. Okay. Okay. I almost read that as Singapore's voters are unusually economically illiterate. But okay, the article says literate. So that's good. That's good. They've done Singapore well, like in the sense they've made everyone educate themselves and so on. So that's good. I may have read it that way or thought that because in other countries, sometimes that happens and that's a well-known fact in different countries. This is a great article. Check it out when you can. Yeah, like I said, it really struck me that it's not a democracy. But then it explained why the view is incomplete. I was like, how can this be on a government website? Oh, of course it's on a government website. Okay, makes sense. Now, I'm not presenting this as proof of anything. I'm sharing it as context. This is the next thing. Does effectiveness require holding office? Now, this was a major learning point for me. And hopefully it's a major learning point for you guys, or some of you already know, as I've said before, and you're great at this politics stuff. Comment below and then we can all learn from you as well. So here's the core question I want to leave you with. Can an opposition be effective without executive power? Is raising issues enough, or does effectiveness require actually running ministries and systems? I'm not answering that. I'm asking it. Perhaps an opposition MP would be able to chime in here, or you can ask them this in the Meet the People sessions and so on, or during the elections, and ask them, how effective do you think you have been allowed to be? How effective do you think you have been? How effective can you be? Perhaps I will try to interview an opposition MP and even a PAP MP as soon as I can on the Zephyr show. That channel's lagging behind a little bit because I have these couple of really long interviews that I did with pretty bad microphones. I'm going to clean up that audio and upload those. You can check that out on youtube.com/@thezephyrshow. There should be more coming soon. Go and ask that question and see what answers you get, and then you'll be able to learn more about the political system in Singapore. Now, I don't have a final answer, but I think the question is worth asking properly, calmly, without slogans or outrage. And that's why I made this video. As I said, this is a new topic. I'm learning about politics in Singapore. I only really got deep into it, started to get deep into it in 2025 in the elections when I guess we moved into our first home. And so then I took on a more family man approach. And then I was like, yeah, let me figure out the country I live in now that I'm no longer a kid and, we have now real world things to do in our own home and blah, blah, blah. And that's when I got interested as owners of our own home and so on. Like, do we actually have an opposition in Singapore? This is just a little bit of my own personal commentary at the end. Does it actually have an opposition? So even after learning from ChatGPT and Google and the articles and everywhere else that, Parliament is for debate and discussion, okay? So then the running of it is actually on the ground in the ministries and so on and so forth. And if a lot of opposition MPs do not work in those ministries, then how much opposition is there really? And of course, one of my spiritual friends, like I said at the start of the video, said we don't actually need an opposition. We just need alternative views. And we need to check and balance power for all humans. And I understand this. And I'll give you an example from my own home. I and my wife, sometimes we discuss and we plan like who's going to do which role, like, who's going to be in charge of the helper being in charge of the kitchen, who's going to be in charge of picking up and dropping the daughter to school, who's going to be in charge of liaising with the school teachers, who's going to be in charge of liaising with the outside classes for our daughter, who's going to be in charge of working on our personal development as a couple, who's going to be in charge of planning the holidays, who's going to be in charge of blah, 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 blah. Now, sometimes we found that when either one of us gets too many roles, we can get power hungry. Not necessarily in a way that we're like, yes, I love this power. Not like that. But subconsciously, we may think I'm the one in charge. So I decided this. So shut the fuck up and follow it. But then we realized, hang on, there have to be checks and balances even for that. Of course, it's not as big or vibrant a debate as Singapore politics. Obviously, it's just the two of us and we sort it out pretty quickly and we discuss then what's going to happen next and so on. But I'm just saying, if that happens in a country, no wonder there's such spirited opposition feelings, spirited ruling party as well. And, there was even that speech by Lee Hsien Loong. It was on Facebook, and I think I downloaded the video. It was by this platform called Wake Up Singapore, where a few years ago, and I believe I was actually a kid during that time, or just much younger, and I saw that live on TV because my dad was like, come, sit down and watch this. This is interesting. And he was saying, I have to spend my time fixing the opposition because their job is to fix me. Like their job is to make sure I have a hard time or to question, and I have to worry about that versus seeing how our policies are going to do. And that completely makes sense. It completely makes sense because, and I totally understand that when I'm running the house or running a certain part of our household, I don't want people interfering. Who would? If you're doing your day job, let's say, you don't want people interfering, you're running your business. Why would you want people interfering? Nobody, no human wants that. Now, on the flip side, people are rallying against that speech, or they use that speech to say, why would Lee Hsien Loong says my job is to fix the opposition? I mean, you're taking a sentiment and running with it. I get it. And the sentiment is not invalid. It is a very valid sentiment. If you feel strongly for the opposition or for the ruling party, of course, you're going to have sentiments. And that's great. But we need to check and balance ourselves as human beings, I feel, before we just go, this person is a villain. And it's like, no, they're not really a villain. They're just a person and a human being. But you're taking your upset emotion and now running and then building that in your head and building it and building it and building it. And you meet the person. Like when Lawrence Wong actually came on the Yala Butt podcast, which is run by a couple of my friends. And you listen to him and he's giving all the politically correct or correct answers, however you want to see it. You can't really argue with correct answers if they're correct. And you're like, I stopped myself and I went, because I tend to be a bit of a cynic and I tend to question and dig deep because I have to as a counselor and a life coach and so on. You have to dig deep or you don't get anywhere. So I tend to dig deep behind what people's facial expressions are saying, what they might be thinking and so on. I realized he hasn't actually answered any question in a sinister way at all. He's like this jolly, friendly, huggable teddy bear. At least that's how his face looks like. And it's like, if you're okay with the way the country is being run, seems like a solid guy to run the country. If you're not okay with it, of course you will feel like, oh, he's evil, But that's all humans, and we feel that about all things. Like, at some points, I've heard spiritual people say, like, maybe this cup is evil. I'm like, huh? What do you mean the cup is evil? They're like, yeah, you're under black magic attack. I mean, And I'm not saying black magic doesn't exist. It does exist. And for those of you going, wait, he was making sense up to this point in the video. What's he talking about? Don't worry about that. That's for the spiritual folk. They know what I'm talking about because it does exist. Energy, obviously, energy is real. Otherwise, how do you press a remote control and your TV switches on? Okay, just a quick energy lesson for everyone. But energy is real. Of course, we're all just atoms and that's just energy. You will have some emotions. You will have some feelings about these things. And I completely get that. But the question still remains after all this talk and debate that I'm doing on this video, and even in your own minds, you might have a much more deep background and understanding of politics. Is there really an opposition in Singapore? And what with the whole leader of the opposition being kicked out, is there really an opposition in Singapore left? That is a question that remains to be answered. And I'd love to hear your answers. And we can all learn and evolve as we go through this discussion. And whatever may be a true answer for you necessarily today might not be the same answer 10 years from now, because things evolve, things change. And that's life on planet Earth, my friends. But I'll strive to interview these wonderful people who work in politics. They're all intelligent, amazing, industrious, illustrious. Let's just enjoy ourselves as we learn more about the politics in Singapore and hope that everybody here has an easy life as we move towards a more and more stable nation. And hopefully people aren't facing too hard of a time financially. And even if you are, I'd like to tell you this spiritually, sometimes the greatest bliss is found within ourselves, not in what we wear, not in what we eat, not in where we live, but inside. I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much. Take care.